Hey everybody, this is Eddie Babbage, founder, CEO of Timeline Genius, your host here of the Wedding Industry Insider podcast, and I've got a very special guest for you. This is Emily McMahon with us today. She has 16 years of experience in the wedding industry. She is the owner of Soirée, which is an a wedding planning company in Iowa City, Iowa, though she does events beyond that locale. And I've known Emily for years. I consider her a friend at this point. She's amazing, and you all are definitely in for a treat. So, Emily, thank you very much for taking time to do this interview with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Awesome. So, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to give people a little sort of preview of what's coming here. We'll get more, depth in, on your background and stuff, but I want folks to know like Emily has built a successful planning company. She's gone from like the start where it was just her to now having a team and still maintaining the quality of like work that she, had when it was her doing things. But we're going to talk about scaling. We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about ways that you might be able to also generate some ancillary lines of revenue, which I know is interesting. And there's, yeah, a lot to get in here, but just ultimately real world, real wedding planner advice and experience that's going to be shared. But before we get into all of that, Emily, would you mind just giving, in your own words, a synopsis of how you got to be where you currently are in the industry?
I would be happy to. So, I started out of high school, went to the University of Iowa for college, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do as a grown up. So, I used my strengths. I had always been a musical theater kid. So, the University of Iowa at the time didn't have like a musical theater degree, but they did have a degree called Performing Arts Entrepreneurship. So I took a lot of music, theater, and business classes, and I did a lot of interning with local nonprofits. So with that, I didn't have really that next direction either. So I was applying to a lot of different jobs, and I was lucky enough to be able to get a position that I cherish now. So I worked for 5 years in a hotel in downtown Iowa City, doing the wedding planning and a social catering sales manager. And then I got recruited and went to a large convention center as a senior catering manager. And it was this basis that gave me the confidence and the relationships and everything to start Soiree. And that was 10 years ago now.
Wow. And what was it that just like, do you feel like there was anything just kind of inside of you that was pulled to the profession of wedding planning? Like, what is the thing that it's doing that's like gratifying? Like, what pulled you to the profession?
Yes, I at the hotel and hospitalities and talking to our clients, I saw the need for somebody who wasn't the client and necessarily wasn't the venue person either to be in that role to answer the questions from all of the vendors. And I had friends and family be like, "You would be really good at this." And I think a lot of people are drawn to this because they love to see things go smoothly and they love the execution and the organization of it. But I also love it when a guest this weekend was like giving me knuckles saying like, "Thanks so much. Everything is great. Like I'm having the time of my life." Or like that big hug from the bride or her mom at the end of the night. Like that 5-star review that you get a few weeks later. Like those are the things that really give me the love and keep me going through anything that's difficult. And I've always kind of had that since getting into that industry. And that's my favorite part.
Yeah, I love that, Emily, and it really resonates with me. I mean, you've listened to our podcast, for a while, and
Hmm.
we've known each other for years. Like that really just squares nicely with what I tell people. Like, no matter what industry or profession you're in, like we're all here to serve and to use our talents and energy to make the world better. And like what you're talking about is those moments where you get direct affirmation that like, thank you, like you have made my life better. And it's really sacred work that a wedding planner's doing, right? Like this
Yeah,
is some of like one of the most special days, maybe the most important day of somebody's life that
right.
you're planning.
Yeah. And I think our culture puts so much emphasis on these types of events, especially weddings. But, like we've also done different types of mitzvahs that, that parent has been looking forward to for their child, or,
Yeah.
different events that surround a wedding, or even, corporate events when it's like a 40th anniversary, or, something that is really special to the client and then the attendees of the event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah. And I should just kind of be transparent here and give people, the scoop. So I can't remember exactly when or how we ended up connecting, but I do remember it was through Timeline Genius. You were coming on board. And I just remember being like, and you were one of those planners is like, wait a minute. No, I've got an existing robust set of systems and
Mhm.
infrastructure here. There's a whole leap of faith in terms of like trying this new thing. And I think it was through that process, like of you were like, you had very like pointed questions about everything.
I
And
did.
I think over the years, our whole team, Emily, has just, just come to just love you and respect the work that you're doing. And we probably talk about you internally more than you even know. We're like, well, we're thinking about Emily here. Like, well, we want Emily's. Is like, just have a ton of admiration for you and what you've done with your business. So,
Thank you. I
what?
mean, I love your program. It really leveled up my business in the best way. And I know this isn't an advertisement for
Yeah,
Timeline Genius,
good.
but I had a very robust CRM, which I still do and I still love and I rely on heavily. And I had lots of different hacks that I was doing to create timelines and make it feel personal. But your program really did. It was a while ago. It was a long time ago now,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, and being able to have that's who I am too, is like I want to help the team that I create for a client and for an event. And I want to be that planner that can also help others. So like if I'm having this issue, I'm like, hey, like Eddie, or when Alex was there, whoever, I would just be asking the questions like, could we
yeah,
do this? Or like, what's
yeah,
the best way to work around that? Or, so
yeah,
I'm loving the tech part
yeah.
of being the business owner too. So
Well, I will probably come back and get a little bit more info from you about Timeline Genius. But the first thing that kind of jumps out at me, Emily, and I love it. We're in the pre-interview, and there's just such humility in every chat we have, and I'm just like, what you've done is awesome, right? Like I think that I know for a fact that no aspect of being a wedding planner or building a wedding planning business is easy. And I'm sure anybody that's doing it right now can empathize with that statement. And when I see people like you, that like you went from those early days where you're doing everything yourself and like all the way to kind of building out what people tell us to do as business owners, like work on your business, like you've worked on your business. Like I want to talk initially here about
sure.
the process of scaling. And let's start with what was it like in the early days when you first started your company? Take if to the best of your recollection, like let's step back into where you were 10 years ago, 9, 8 years ago. Like tell me about the early days of your company.
Yeah, I had just had a baby. I had jumped to a job that was in nonprofit festivals for the community, and was working really hard. And I had friends and family be like, "You should just be a wedding planner on the side." Like it was a side hustle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was really busy, and so I knew that I needed to make things official when you're working with clients. So my first contracts were on paper, like printed out and handed to them.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, then I was talking to some photography friends, and they had a CRM, which is your like client reservation management system. It manages everything. So I bought that, like, and then you start to realize like, oh, it would be a lot easier, faster if I just templated things and then writing those. And then I got to a point where I was, getting lots of leads, and I was on a call and I was like, oh, I'm booked that weekend. I'm so sorry. Is your date flexible at all? And the bride said like, no, the venue's booked. The church is booked. And I was like, okay, well, best wishes. And a friend was like, what did you just do? When is that wedding? Like, I was like, it's 10 months away. And she's like, you can't find somebody to like do the wedding instead of you could still be the planner. I was like, I can do that. So I just want to tell all of the listeners, like, yes, you can scale and you can have team members. Now, over the last however many years, building that team has been something that I'm happy. You can probably ask me the questions, Eddie, but um, that was a learning process. And I originally started out having team members who were contractors, so
Mhm.
1099 for tax purposes, and I would just write them a check, and then got so much that we were so busy that I was like, I need to make sure I'm doing this right. Like I didn't want to have any risk or liability. So I started working with an HR consulting team who was like, oh my gosh, you need to have employees. We need to switch those. So we did. We transitioned a few years ago. And that was a big process. And now, like, we have this really solid team who I have now created, well, going into that wedding boom year a couple years ago now.
Yes.
um, I didn't have a lot of time to train some of the new staff that I was hiring. And so I then was like, okay, we've got to make sure this is the way that I do it every single time, and that way they know exactly their role, what they should be doing. Um, and I've been updating that every few months to every 6 months, and just reviewing it with the team and continuing to grow that. And so it's been from the very start of just me to now there's weekends where we have weddings and I get to go to my daughter's dance competition,
That's amazing, Emily. And
Yeah.
would you say, so, I think we hear sometimes a lot of conflicting information about building a team.
Hmm.
On the one hand, hopefully people have heard that you do, if you're in business, whether you have employees or planners on your staff besides you, no matter what your situation is, you will need to work with others in order to realize your professional dreams. And in a lot of cases, that looks more specifically like having, a model where you have other planners on your staff, because I think everybody's dream is what you just said. They've got something that they want to do, and they actually have people whom they trust that can do that. On the
And
flip
sometimes
side, yeah,
they have a better, like, day of relationship with
yeah,
that particular couple than maybe I would if I was there. Sometimes, like, I'm so impressed with my team because they can do sometimes things better than maybe if it was me, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. And
Yeah.
that is literally the best case scenario, right? There's no ego. It's like, I feel amazing when there's somebody on my team that can do something better than I can do it. I'm like, this is exactly how it's supposed to be. On the flip side, what we also hear, Emily,
Mhm.
is, the reality is there are a lot of challenges that come with having a team. The weight of being responsible financially for other people's livelihood to some or to a greater degree,
Oh, yes.
um, trust issues. And can you just tell me, before we get into the specifics of how you did what you did in terms of building your team, um, are you happy that you went down this path and that you have a team? Is it financially rewarding to have gone down this path and to have a team? Is it rewarding just in terms of your life fulfillment and happiness and stress meter? Can you just talk to me about the ultimate pros and cons here of both paradigms?
I wholeheartedly love having a team.
Good.
I'm I'm a little bit of an introvert, but most of the time, like, I feel most productive when there's people around me. And I love being able to support those people and give them something that they find rewarding. So, like, for example, I have one associate wedding planner who is a stay-at-home mom, and she loves coming to work. She loves coming because then yeah. Anyways, I digress. I love it. Yes, sometimes I have to remind myself that, like, ooh, this month's bank account is going to go
Right.
way down because we
Yes.
had a busy wedding schedule,
Right.
and that I wholeheartedly that also gives me anxiety.
Of course.
And then looking towards the future, like, okay, I have all these weddings booked, and so that is going to be cash out the door, and how is that all going to work? So
Yes.
um there are lots of pros and cons, I think, to having a team. There's also been times where I didn't have the right person on the team,
Yes.
and that really felt bad when it was an event that I couldn't be at. I think I was working a different wedding that weekend
Yeah.
because we do multiple weddings every weekend. It's
Yep.
just, I love being able to help every couple and not just some couples. So, um, if that person made that choice that I wouldn't have made and that did
Right.
not represent my brand very well or our services and did not follow through with what I had promised. Um, and so there's highs and there's lows.
Understood. And
Yeah.
if you, and again, I'm not going to get into, the dollars and cents of your business because that's confidential, but to the degree that you're comfortable sort of answering from a financial standpoint, because
Mhm.
even in all respects, there are pros and cons, right? In terms of
Right.
your peace of mind, there are pros to working by yourself. There are stresses that you don't have because everything's on your plate and you know what you're capable of. And there are cons because everything's on your plate. You've got to worry about and I think the same thing, having a team, there are pros and cons. On the whole, just kind of big picture financially, if you have the right team, et cetera, if you've kind of built your company the right way, maybe this is a silly question, but I still feel inclined to ask it.
Mhm.
Um, is it a better financial model for you having a team than, say, scaling back and just running your business where you're the one stop sort of show for everything?
It is 1,000% better for me personally
Okay.
to have a team.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Go ahead.
and
Sorry.
and part of that is because a lot of questions that I get in that initial consultation are like, well, what happens if you're sick?
Right.
It's like,
Yes.
oh, well, we have a team of 6 other wedding planners, and not to even mention all of my other friends that are in the wedding industry, like the florists or the stationery people or the caterers or whoever that I can call in a pinch. But I will start with my team first and say, like, oh my gosh, this person had a family emergency, or, like we have people to fill in. So I think that is peace of mind for me.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
that's one of the many reasons why I would say yes to that question.
I asked the question because we hear about the pros, and then
Hmm.
oftentimes when you know I'm talking in like that sort of real talk mode with planners that have
Yeah.
had teams or that have teams. It's like you also hear about the cons and about the financial issues
Yeah.
that come up. But from my standpoint, I very much start from the assumption that having the right team, bold underline. Like if you've got the wrong people, that's going to sink you. It's not good.
Right.
But if you've got the right team, then it does empower you
Yeah.
in so many ways and it can be better, should
Yeah.
be better, even
Well, I
for
think another point about that is that it's hard when you have the right team and then things change.
right.
So we had a team member who went on a maternity leave and decided not to come back this year. Like she's
Right.
got a fresh little new baby, and
Yeah.
um, we had to fill that wedding, and
Right.
that was okay, and that's fine. And things changed. Like her situation changed. We had another team member this year who got a full time job, and I was one of her references, so like I knew it was
Yeah,
coming,
sure. Yeah, yeah.
but in catering. And so she's like, I'm going to be busy every weekend. I love you and I will be there if you need anything, but I'm stepping down, I'm stepping away. And it was like, you know, things change even when you have the right team. And then you have to decide looking forward, do I have enough people to fulfill all the promises that we've kept? And that's something too that keeps me up a little bit at night. Like, okay, that's a really busy wedding weekend and we're kind of fully staffed. Like, but it's going to be okay. And I just have to remind myself, like,
Yeah.
you can't control what you can't control and you can't control the future. So you have to only deal with those things when they come. And sometimes they don't come. Sometimes those like worst case scenarios don't come. So I think the mental load of being that owner and having the
Yeah.
team and
Yeah.
having made promises, not only to the team members, but also to of course, your clients. So
Yeah.
there's that aspect too.
Definitely. Well, and how did you do this, Emily? Because I kind of said if you have the right team. That's a big if. Like you gotta
Mm-hmm.
have the ability. I know, for example, that you have, um, your own sort of hack here for like having an internship program. That's something that you've done that's been a useful tactic for you. Can you talk a little bit about your internship program and the role that maybe has played in your team building overall?
Yeah, I think that's also like part of the story of the growth of the company. So there's I want to get back to your first question, but I'll do that. I'll do the internship question first because
Okay.
that was really the order of the events of how this all kind of happened.
Okay.
Um, because the way that I hire now is dramatically different than the way that I kind of started back then. So I think just remind me to get back to that second
Will
question
do.
if you can help me.
Yep.
So I like I said at the very beginning, I had internships when I was in college, and I think it's really important to help give students real world education, boots on the ground, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So even when I was at the hotel, I asked our directors if I could just have a student who could like be my second set of hands on a wedding day, and we would work with the university and give them college credit for it. And at the time, it was just unpaid. Like that was okay. They were getting credit for this. Like, and of course they had to sign all the contracts and whatever.
Mhm.
So it really started when I was at the hotel, and I created a really awesome wedding intern system, a program. But then when I left that position, I didn't do it for a while. And then when I started Soirée, was like, well, it's just me all by myself. And
Yep.
sometimes, as everybody knows, as a wedding planner, you have to be in 2 different places at the same time, if not 10 different places at the same time. So if I could have somebody who could set up table numbers and place cards, and I could run over to the church and chat with the florist, like,
There you
so I
go.
started offering that. And again, had kind of modeled that after the similar program that I had at the university. So, or at the hotel. I digress. I finally got to a point where I wasn't necessarily finding quality interns as
Mhm.
unpaid.
Okay.
So then I had to decide if I wanted to start paying interns.
Okay.
And there is a program at the university where we are, where if the student has a um, major that isn't within one of these programs, the university actually funds half of their salary.
Ooh. Nice.
So that was something that was really intriguing. And for a long time, I had interns that were also, that I have referenced, like event day of interns, but I've also had marketing interns. So people to help me with our social media posts,
Yeah.
creating content and creating reels and TikToks and all of that. And so that's developed over the last, 7 to 10 years. Um, but now this program actually helps me fund half of their salary. And
Ooh.
it's based on, X amount of hours over a certain amount of weeks. And so I had to make sure that we could do that. So that has been really interesting as well.
How much
And
of an asset has that been? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Emily.
oh no, that's
I've
okay.
got
How much
all
of an
sorts.
asset?
My hamster is totally turning because this is exactly the kind of thing that, like, when we do these podcasts, like, especially today, because you could be in a different city and call up the university in your state and potentially have interns virtually. I don't know. I
Yes.
mean, you don't necessarily have to be like 10 minutes away from campus. And like,
No.
this is something that other people could potentially do. But before I get into the hows further, like, is it something that's been beneficial to you?
It's been incredibly beneficial because I can hire an intern who's getting paid for their work, but they're also gaining the experience and getting the educational credit that they need to
Yeah.
graduate. And then it's become a relationship where my current, I love her. She's not really an intern anymore.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
completed it, but she still works for us. She still
Yeah.
does a lot of things for us. She's
Yeah.
still a student. She's
Yeah.
getting a master's degree and she's on the track team. So she travels all over the country and sometimes the world, and she can be working virtually from wherever she is. And it's a fun topic for her. It's giving her longevity on or her resume. That's giving her, like, I hope and I know, for like a future job. Like I stayed with this
Oh,
company
absolutely.
not just for an
Yeah.
internship for like
Yeah.
3
Yeah. Yeah.
months, but she's been with me for well over a year, if not getting on 2 years now. So
Yeah, it seems to me like I remember my wife actually. She's an entrepreneur. And she also started a nonprofit organization. I remember
hmm,
her um, having interns, and that was just like a pillar of her sort of operational flow that she would get. Now there's obviously more turnover with interns, so there's
yeah.
a little bit more management, like onboarding, and they
And
wrap up say after a few months rather than a few
mhm.
years, but so
I
the
used to do internships that would follow the course of like a wedding season. And I
gotcha.
found that that was the most beneficial. But for the students that wanted to like get in, get out just for a semester, it wasn't as valuable for them
Right. Right.
because by the time they started to kind of understand a little bit,
They're
be
gone.
self sufficient, then they were like, I'm out, peace out. So it
Yeah.
is something that if you have a listener who's like, wow, that's a really interesting idea, just I want them to
Yeah.
know that like that there are some ups and downs and challenges with that.
So, what would you say, just to kind of put a cap on this, Emily, if there, and I'm sure there are people
Okay.
who are listening to this right now that are thinking, that's a good idea. I didn't think about that. Like, and
Yeah.
sometimes, like, that's all it is. Like, sometimes, like, somebody listens to an interview, I'm like, starts an internship program, and like, wow, that was really worth checking out. But if somebody's listening and they're like, I think I want to try that. I actually have a university near me or
Mhm.
whatever. What is the sort of the quick list of bullets that you would say, hey, if you're gonna try this, I would keep points A, B, and C in mind. Like what's the sort of quick sort of overview
A,
I would
every
say?
college is different, and you have to make sure that that's an actual like tract.
Mhm.
So for ours currently, it's only a certificate,
Okay.
and you have to become friends with the administrators of that program, whether it's a certificate, a minor, or a major.
Okay.
And I got in with mine by offering to be a guest speaker at some of the classes.
Mhm.
And so then I was like, well, yeah. So, anyways, long story short, um, you got to be friends. You got to make
Yeah.
friends with people.
Okay.
And then I think getting the legalities in place is really important because you need to have a contract that explicitly states like this is an internship and limit your liability, or this is an employment at this rate. So making sure that you're covered from the HR standpoint.
Yeah.
Um, and then figuring out pay and payroll and compensation and having those conversations. Um, and then, of course, balancing that with any other staff members that you have.
Right.
So, yeah,
Okay.
getting job
Cool.
descriptions, that kind of thing too. Yeah.
As a wedding planner, you know how important it is to create detailed wedding day timelines for your events. But creating your timelines can be a tedious and time-consuming job. Until now. Because Timeline Genius lets you create beautiful, detailed wedding day timelines with ease. And it keeps everything you need on the wedding day in one central place. Here's how it works. First, Timeline Genius saves all your clients, vendors, and venues in your Rolodex, so you don't lose time looking for their information. And when you're ready to create a new timeline, you simply enter the key information for your wedding. Click a button, and voila! Timeline Genius magically gives you a customized timeline for your event, where all the details are laid out and the times are calculated for you. From there, you can easily edit your timeline by adding or deleting items, inserting images, changing font styles, and customizing everything to your liking. You can also instantly shift the times for as many items as you want. And when it comes to your clients and vendors, Timeline Genius lets you give them the highest level of service. You can send them tailored timelines, showing only the items they're involved in. And you can collaborate by inviting them to a mobile-friendly, web-based version of the timeline. You can even set text message reminders to automatically go out on the wedding day. And once you've completed your perfect timeline, you can download it or email it out as a beautifully styled PDF. And that's Timeline Genius, a smart software that will help take your wedding planning to the next level. Start your free trial today.
So you mentioned something else that I'm gonna, and I have not forgotten to circle us back to the original sort of team building
Yeah.
point, but I think this is a good natural chance because you just mentioned the idea of being an instructor. I know firsthand, Emily, and I saw this very starkly on display during the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of wedding planners, if they had the option, would try to have some other lines of revenue
Mm-hmm.
because well, there's also cyclicality for a lot of planners, depending on where you are, geographically, you can kind of have a feast or famine natural sort of cycle to your cash flows and workflow. And you had what I think is a pretty interesting idea for a way to make some money on the side. You just mentioned it, like the idea of being an instructor. Can you talk a little bit about how you got to do that and why that for you has been like a nice add on to your professional sort of toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was probably 2, 3 years after I had started my business, and it was still a side hustle at the time. I had not gone full time with it. And I had interns, so I had been also volunteering for the university just as a guest speaker. And then after class one time, the administrator of that program asked me if I would consider being an adjunct instructor, meaning that I would not be receiving benefits from the university, but I would get some extra checks, for teaching classes. And so I started teaching an event management workshop, which had been developed by the department. And so the students had to plan real world events, and I would just be facilitating those. But I was on campus 2 days a week for about 2 hours a day. And so it did take a considerable amount of time. And then they started offering for me to create my own courses, which was really fun. So I created a course all about private events, which, just teaching like best practices and like breaking things down step by step, and what's really important. Then I had them all create or work with a real client on a private event that I had found from people in the community. I also taught a design class because I'm really driven by all of the design work that I do for events and how that really affects the guest journey. So I created that class. Anyways, then the pandemic hit, and the class that I was teaching, we had to go completely virtual. And so I got through that May and, finished up that class. And then it was like classes weren't in session, and they cut a lot of those things. So, but I've always remained friendly with that program. And so that was a really great bump in extra income, though, all those years that I did that. And then I've still, kept in touch with them, and they asked me to come back this spring. So I will be teaching another class this spring that I'm working on developing right now about events and artificial intelligence. And I have not started it yet, but that's on my to-do list. So I will be starting that in January, which will be nice because I'll have a little bit of extra income.
It's hard. I'm sure like it's another thing to juggle, and you're already super busy, but obviously it's worth it. Otherwise you wouldn't have said yes to this new opportunity. I'm assuming for you, this has been on the whole a net beneficial sort of thing, right?
Yeah. And just getting involved. I have had lots of students who didn't go into the wedding industry, but they've contacted me when they got engaged and said like, hey, like I'm getting married. Like, could I look at your services? What are your options? And that's been really awesome too, because, it just keeps coming around.
That's awesome. Okay. So that's another thing. I mean, hopefully, internship, that is a concrete thing that people can explore if they feel like that's relevant. The idea of teaching, that's another concrete thing. I think sometimes I see like sometimes planners, understandably so, they kind of are like the horse running with blinders on, because there's so much already competing for your attention that you don't necessarily kind of look up and take inventory of the lay of the land. But there are these other opportunities that may not be front and center that can really be beneficial, especially if you're in a cash pinch or something like that. So to circle back to what we talked about, Emily, just the broader point beyond just the internships, the broader point of building a team, like that doesn't happen overnight. Nobody came, unless I'm missing some part of your story, and said, hey, Emily, I'll handle the HR. Like, I'll just go and build this team. Like, you had to do that while being a planner, while building all the other aspects of your company. How did you go from where you were with zero team to where you are today with the team that you have?
Yeah, I knew that I needed more people, and finally had the confidence to start finding people. So it was everything from posting on Indeed to word of mouth to posting on our social medias that we're hiring. And I worked with an HR company who originally said like, yeah, like if it's just a few here and there, you can do this 1099 contractor thing. Like, great. So I got all my agreements in place and got, all of that set up and tracked everything for accounting. And then I would send them a 1099 at the end of the year for their taxes. And that was really great. And that worked for a while. And then we just got busier and busier and busier to a point where I needed to have them be employees so I could there was a lot of benefits to both sides, but I was in a place that I needed to have real employees. And that's been really great because I can provide all of the equipment. I can say these are our standards and this is what I want this to be like. And so I then had an HR company who helps us with the legalities, the paperwork, and even things like employee conversations. Like, hey, I heard this. Like, I have somebody else who I can reach out to and say, like, oh, what do I respond back with? Or I've had the issues with, like, I get a letter from the state saying that like somebody is claiming unemployment. Like, how do I deal with that? Like, so having those consultants is really great. But when I go to hire, I still do the same sort of thing. Like, we will post the jobs to like LinkedIn, Indeed. I haven't had to do this for a while, so forgive me, but I will do an initial interview, and then I will schedule a second interview. The first interview is usually like 15 to 30 minutes. And the second interview, the first interview, I usually just try to like see what they know about us and find out what their experience level is, because I don't want to hire somebody who doesn't have direct, great wedding experience, because I'm so passionate about that in general. I think that in order to be a good wedding planner, you have to know what's important to the other vendors and all of that. We can get into that later. And then the second interview, I started to ask like real world questions. Like, have you ever dealt with this ... or tell me about a time, those sorts of questions. Then the next thing that I do is I send them the Gallup Strengths Finder, which is a work-based personality quiz, basically. So you can find out what all their strengths are. So it's based on 34 individual types of strengths. And I compare their numbers to the rest of the team. And because I want a well-rounded team. And I also want people who are not exactly like me. I want, because there's things that I'm really good at, and that's the things that I take care of. But then there's also things that I know that other people have strengths in, and they're maybe not something that is my strength either. So I just like be able to look and see. So I cover the cost for that. That's not something that they do. And then I really just have a good gut check, like with me. Like, do I like this person? Can I have a conversation with them? Can I sit down and have a cup of coffee with them? And can we get along? Could I imagine being like real friends with them? Are they going to be my champion? Are they going to like go the extra mile at an event, even when they're tired or hungry or don't want to do something? And that's how I've really found the right people, is because I take my time and I make them know that it's really important to me. And I think that our team exemplifies that, you know.
That's so cool. Yeah, and it is so important, like the people you bring on. And the other facet of this is leadership, which you and I talked about. Um, and you really like just like struck a nerve with me. I feel like just in terms of like a core similarity between us when you talked about you're a harmonious leader. I feel like that's me to a T, perhaps to a fault.
Yeah.
But can you talk to me a little bit about your leadership style and unpack for me a little bit what you meant when you were like talked about like being harmonious?
Yeah. So Gallup Strengths Finders for me, like, I'm a woo person and I'm an organization person, but at my core, my number one is harmony. And that for me is like, I just want everybody to get along. I want everybody to enjoy what they're doing. I want the drama and the stress to, just like, it's fine. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And for me, that always doesn't mean that I'm great in conflict. Like, there's some downside to that, because I don't like conflict, as nobody does, but there's people that really lean into that, and that's not for me. But I with our team, and then with all of the vendors and with the clients, like, I'm just like, okay, and maybe to a fault too, like you just said, like I just love making people happy, and that's my strength. Like, okay, what can we do to fix this? Like, maybe I'm not answering your question. I feel like I'm
Oh,
rambling.
you totally are. No, you're really tugging at my heartstrings, Emily, because I feel like and this isn't some sort of back-ended way of me being like, I'm such a good person. No, like really
No.
like perhaps to a fault. Like, but I just love when I find people in the world who are like me that just start from a standpoint of I
Like
want to be
caring.
cool. Yeah, like I
Yeah.
don't want to I don't want to have nasty conversations. I don't want to be upset. I think there's a way for me and to give and to receive feedback. It's okay, but like even critical feedback could be delivered in a respectful, kind way. And
Mhm.
I just feel like there are people in this world, and you're one of them, that just kind of start from that baseline of I'm happy and I want other people to be happy. I just want everybody to be cool here. And then sometimes, you see these sort of iconic leaders that have, like a Steve Jobs, rest in peace, or Bill Gates, where you read the stories and they're like shouting at people and all that. I'm like, I just don't, and they're effective, it's like
Yeah.
it works, but I'm like, I don't have that in me, man. Like, that's just not my style. But how do you have for you, how do you feel like, on the whole, honestly, this part of your sort of human nature has served you? Like, is it something that ultimately has been a benefit and asset for you, or is it something that you feel
Mhm.
like actually has held you back from success you otherwise might have achieved?
I mean, I think it really serves me because no matter what the event is, like I really genuinely want to earn that, like their approval, their 5-star review, that big hug at the end of the night, that
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah,
And I will find myself doing things that other people might not want to. Like,
yeah,
I'm not gonna, I would feel really bad if I left the venue while the mom or the bride and groom were like trying to like find their stuff or like finish packing up or finish, like I want to get to a place where they're like, it's okay, you can go. Like if that shuttle, left and it was full and they have to wait until it comes back, like I'm that person. I don't want them to be like, well, I can't believe she left. Like, yeah, that sort of thing. So I think it really just finishes that like going above and beyond. And that sets the tone for the rest of the company too. So that way the rest of the team is not like, well, I've got something else to do. Peace out. Good luck. Like,
yeah, yeah,
and that's just one example. But um, ultimately, like that's why we do what we do. We love to create joy and
yeah.
we love to create these, help be a part of creating these memories for that's ultimately what we do. And I think harmony and like creating that love and that safe place for all these events to happen is why I started this.
I love
Yeah.
that, Emily. I think that's beautiful, and I agree 100%. You did something else that I found really intriguing. I love there are just these little concrete things, be it the internship, be it being the instructor. And this next thing is also something concrete that I thought was interesting that you did, which is the survey. And I want to tee this up, and I'll tell people why I think it's interesting. I've had 3 companies, and I feel like the biggest lesson I've learned as an entrepreneur is that we need to focus on helping others, on solving a
Mhm.
problem, giving benefit to others. And the way I went about building Timeline Genius really is case in point. There's something called the lean startup methodology in tech circles, which, to make it very simple, when I was starting Timeline Genius, I was like, I want to find a problem. I didn't know anything about wedding planner. I started talking to wedding planners and I asked, what's the biggest problem, the most tedious part of your job? And you start hearing about timelines, and it's like, okay, why? And
Mhm.
most entrepreneurs, when they're starting a company, they think it's all about, I'm going to have an amazing idea. I'm going to go raise money. I'm going to go build it, blah, blah, blah. But I think the powerful thing is to figure out, wait a minute, who am I serving? What's the problem I solve? What is the thing that they need me to do to really be satisfying? And I found that really, in a different form, you applied that same powerful mindset to your job as a wedding planner. So talk to me just a little bit about the survey that you ran, and then let's kind of get into the results.
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, like I started the company because I saw this need after working in hotels. And so I love our role and I think improving on it every year is really important. And I get asked by students and just, people in general, like, I think I want to be a wedding planner. And I'm like, okay, so ultimately our role is to be the expert on every aspect of your wedding. So just like if you were building a house or a skyscraper, you're going to have maybe an architect and that's going to be the design and that's going to be the ideas. And this is probably a metaphor that everybody's heard, so I'm just sorry I'm using it. But and then you're going to have a general contractor, so that's execution. And that general contractor is going to find you like the electricians and the plumbers and the flooring guy or whatever. But so that's our DJs, that's our photographers, that's our caterers, that's our venues. And it's our job to know what's incredibly important to them to make the success of an event for the clients and the guests that are attending.
Yes.
Because one little thing, as we all know, throws everything off. And so I have spent years working either alongside or shadowing or touring venues, like with tons of different vendors, caterers. And because I think that the more knowledge that I have about what's important to them really serves me and gives me a lot of credibility when I do those initial consultations with a client too. Like, oh yeah, like, oh, you picked that venue. Like, oh, okay, we're going to have to really be careful of this, this, and this, and then when the vendor or the venue knows that you have their back on all of those maybe policies or preferences even, they're going to refer you more. So, Addie, I'm so happy to be here because I wasn't sure exactly like what to bring up today. So I reached out to my local wedding network and sent some direct emails, but also put it out to a group that's over 700 people. And I got a bunch of responses from vendors and venues.
Yeah.
And the results were really interesting. I did it completely anonymously.
Sorry to interrupt, Emily. Just one quick little context providing thing. You know what I've done over the years for folks that have listened, I've been doing this for years. I do the exact same thing when most of my interviews are a lot of my interviews are with planners or other types of business professionals. When I'm talking to, another, like a Ron Ben Israel, who's like a famous, cake bake, like when I'm talking to these other professionals, I almost always ask them, like, you work with a lot of different planners, like, what is the thing that you see in the grades that's separating them from the pack? What is it that makes a planner the type of planner that you want to work with? So I just think this is and it's the type of feedback too that most planners aren't getting as much of. They're kind of in their own head. And I think it's really powerful. So,
and I think vendors are a little apprehensive on being completely honest with a planner because they don't want to step on anybody's toes.
Right.
They don't want to not necessarily fight, but have disagreements with the client in the middle.
Right.
And I think a lot can go unsaid.
It doesn't benefit them to give just raw, candid, constructive feedback.
Yeah.
Because if anything, they're like, I just want you to like me and refer business and let's work together anytime the occasion arises. It's almost not in their self-serving interest to, even share that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what did you, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like, I just wanted to and even for my own purposes, and I didn't make this about me. I just said, I asked vendors, what do you want wedding professionals to know in general? So I asked, like, what do you like about having a wedding planner? And then what do you think that they need to know? And I think the need to know was really interesting. I found out what the different categories were too. So I have found out that, some vendors want to be more involved. Like they want to be able to get to know their clients more. There's some wedding planners out there that, you can talk to my client, but everything has to go through me.
Yeah.
And I think there's a fine balance of that because there's clients that don't want to have all those conversations, but there's vendors that feel like disconnected if they're not able to get to know their clients.
Yeah, that's a fine art, like drawing that balance between like you are the conductor of the orchestra, you're the planner, and you better be on top of everything and in certain ways controlling a lot or have your fingers in multiple pies, but like at the same time, because if something goes wrong, it's going to roll back on you. Like but at the same time, not asserting yourself in a way that makes your vendors feel alienated or like they don't have the input that they would like to have or the touches they'd like to have.
And that goes back to that harmony thing, like, or just being friendly.
Yeah.
You want them to feel like they can work with you and their client because they're also serving in that role.
Yeah.
And then, like the survey also was like, I had a DJ be like, you don't have to have such long dance floor time. Sometimes like the dance floor can start a lot later. So there was some concrete examples
Yeah.
too that were just really direct and like, hey, this would make my life better. So I think for planners, finding out what would make your vendors and your venues, what would make their lives better, and then tailoring your events to those things.
That's a great idea. It's funny. I think we think, planners, you think a lot about your client is your client, obviously. But when you're working, your work product actually is spanning like all of your creative partners, all of your vendors. Like these are all people. And I know I'm kind of stating the obvious here, but
Mm-hmm.
like, you want to make the right impression, not just on your clients, but on all of your vendors. So how cool is it? And this is what we have to do again, like as a tech entrepreneur, this is kind of instilled in us that like you need to be getting feedback from your customers. Everybody that's using our service, like we
Mm-hmm.
need to hear, what do you want? What are we not doing great? Be super candid. Tell me the truth. Like, what an interesting idea to kind of do this same sort of feedback gathering process, for your clients and your vendors.
Yeah.
Anything else that popped out, and there's, I know we can't get into necessarily every single answer, but are there one or two other just sort of high level points, Emily, that came through that you're like, huh, that's interesting. Like what?
Yeah, and I have to agree with this one. So one of the things that was brought up is that like a month out coordination package, and years ago I used to do a 6 week out package.
Uh,
They said it's too short. Like
yeah.
I, the reason why I stopped doing a 6 week out package is that I was finding that by the time I got to that client, and then they were telling me all of the things that they had planned, I was unwinding all of the things that were about to go wrong, you know? And
Yeah.
I would spend extra time that month or that 6 weeks, like just trying to like undo those decisions. And then it was stressful for the couple because they're like, well, we had picked this, but now you're telling me I have to do that.
Yeah.
So we as a company, clients, whenever they book with us, they have a limited number of meetings with us and they can use that at any point in time. And I find that a lot find value in doing it early. So I
Yeah.
can create their timeline, for example,
Yeah.
and then they have that structure for the day. So they don't put like a 2:30 ceremony start time when really it should be a 5 o'clock ceremony start time. And all of a sudden, now that's a problem that we can't fix because the invitations are already out or something like that. So I thought that that was an interesting one that,
That's a great piece of feedback. And I've heard that from other experienced wedding pros, Emily, that same feedback has certainly come up before.
mm-hmm. Yep. Um, they said everything from like, they don't love it when the planners carry the dress right before the walk down the aisle. We often end up with the planner in the background of the photos, even though like I feel like sometimes that's my job, like fluff the dress one time and jump out of the way. And it was like, okay, so maybe, and this was anonymous, so I don't know. Like that's a quirk that maybe that photographer is like, nope, don't want you there at all. Okay, so now I need to probably figure out who that person was, which I won't be able to. But it's good to know like little things like that. And then
Do maybe one more. Pick the next best one that you see, Emily. Because I know obviously I would love to just get into the details of the full thing, but I'm
yeah,
watching the time
no,
fly as I knew it would. Um,
right. Um, I mean, making sure that you're matching couples with the vendors that really will make a like connecting the right people.
Yeah. How do you do that, Emily? I mean, that was one of the reasons I remember hearing that. That's part of why we added like timelines in the Rolodex so you can see for a given vendor which events you worked on them because you can be like, oh, like this event is a good fit or comp
Hmm.
for like this. Like, how do you kind of
That
think about,
matchmaking.
yeah, how do you do that matchmaking? Is
Yeah. So I
it doing
get to know my
or-
couple really well.
yeah,
I
yeah,
ask, I have them fill out a survey. And so I kind of know like their top few things. And then while I'm getting to know their personalities or what's important to them. So like if I have a very, I had a bride who was recovering from heart surgery and she wanted just something that was really, really chill, really low stress. Like she had open heart surgery. So it was like, okay, I know every single vendor that we hire can't be high energy. So making sure that you're paying attention even to little things like my my mom's very involved. Okay, well, we need somebody that can speak to the couple and jive with them, but also can work with, the parents too, or something like that. And then I also really pay attention to vendors' communication, their, video or photo turnaround time, um, and some of like the logistics, like this one sends a lot of surveys and a lot of questions because they have to. Maybe they don't work with planners a lot, but like that's not going to be a good fit for my client. Or if it is, then I need to talk to that vendor and maybe have them make some changes in their workflow, like that sort of thing.
That's interesting. I mean, this is kind of almost so obvious that I am reluctant to even point it out, but I think it's also so important that I'm going to point it out. Knowing your client, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and knowing your vendors, like, not just like the website read of the vendor, but like really knowing the person. When you know both people, like that's kind of a prerequisite if you're going to be matching two people up, that you've taken the time to really get to know them.
Yeah, and it's not about playing favorites. Like that's not the point. It's literally just making, like, if somebody does a really good job at X, Y, and Z and you have a couple that's going to expect that, then that's a good fit.
Yeah.
But I'm also a wedding planner that, like, I will work with anybody who's new and anybody who is just learning. Like there's a place for that, absolutely. But it also has to match with like the caring and the style and the delivery and they're how they do things,
Yeah. Well, gosh, this interview, they fly when I'm having fun. I have one more key question that I'm definitely going to ask, and people that listen to the podcast will know what's coming there. It's always a good one.
Mhm.
Before we get to that, I told you in the pre-interview I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't get your candid sort of feedback as a planner, as somebody who's where you are in your career that's been using Timeline Genius for years. So normally, in most episodes, two-thirds of the way in, whatever, at some point I do a plug.
Mhm.
I do passionately believe in our platform, and I started it just kind of like we talked about, Emily. I know that back in 2013, I didn't know anything about wedding planning. I had no preconceived idea of what I was going to do. I did know with pure conviction that I wanted to find a real problem that was affecting people. And, just through talking to planners and just hearing like, oh my gosh, yeah, timelines are such an important part of what allows me to do my job. But hearing also from people like you that it was like a really detailed, time consuming endeavor to put together, not a sort of, so, no disrespect to anybody. I've heard some people, oh, I do my timelines in like 30 minutes and they're like a page and a half long. I'm like, okay, well, that's a different thing than when I'm talking to people like you that are like, no, my timelines are so amazing. If I got hit by a bus, not gonna let nobody get hit by a
Yeah.
bus, somebody else could take this document. Somebody on my team could take this timeline and still pull off a great event. So anyway, I think I'd be remiss in my duties here if I didn't give you a chance. And don't, no words in your mouth. Don't have to say
No.
anything flattering just because we're friends. But, from your perspective as a planner, what would you say to other wedding planners, just sort of heart to heart, planner to planner, about your experience with Timeline Genius and what maybe they should be thinking about if they're like, I've heard of Timeline Genius. I can do my timelines. I already do them in Word, or there's this other, software I'm using that has a timeline tool. It's not great, but whatever. Like, what would you say to those folks?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I was that person. I was creating timelines and spreadsheets, and I was taking things from a photographer and their Word doc and trying to match things. And I was spending hours. And even if somebody thinks that like they're only spending a little bit of time, like copying and pasting from, this one wedding to this one wedding, it's not true. Like if something shifted 15 minutes, I would spend a long time trying to fix it. And then I was making tailored timelines back at, I would look at my big giant timeline of everything, and then I would pull out what was important to the bridesmaids, and I would pull out what was important to the groomsmen and make a new document, and I would pull out what's important to the immediate family. And Timeline Genius saved me hours and hours and hours of work that I had been doing for years. And so that gave me the time back to do other projects for my business and be able to have more time doing the actual planning with my clients. and it continues to grow, and which has been really helpful for me. And I love your team that I have been able to work on, like, hey, this is kind of clunky for me, or like, do you have a workaround for that? And you and your team have always been so generous and kind to work with me and making adjustments and like, oh, that's a new feature that we could offer or something. And then there's even things that I think other planners might find really interesting, like your new checklist feature. And so just I'm a lifelong, like, I will always be a champion of Timeline Genius and the different ways that I've been able to utilize it for my business. I know that other people will benefit if they're on the fence right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Emily. And, again, I can talk all day and people are like, well, he's the CEO of the company. He's supposed to say that, but I think hearing from, someone like you that obviously, you're in the trenches, you've built an amazing company.
And my vendors give me compliments every single weekend. Like, we love your timeline. We love being able to like download their version of it. They love being able to like check in and write comments. Like, I get so many compliments all the time.
Yeah. Well, Emily, I kind of teased this, but there is one question that I always ask, which is if you could give one piece of advice based on, all of your years of professional experience and just personal experience in the world to help other planners that are listening to us right now, what would your one piece of advice be to help them as much as possible?
Ask anybody you're working with, is there something that I can learn about? What would make your life easier? What would make your life easier for me to know? What can I do better? And even if it's a hard thing, or even if you have to go tour that venue that you've never been to before, and just like, what's the best loading in drawer? Little things. Just ask the what can be better question.
I love that, Emily. And this is based on something that you and I talked about very briefly in the pre-interview. And I saw your eyes kind of light up. For me, it's an intriguing question, just even about myself. But like, let's say, we're catching up in person and I'm like, Emily, I've got a freaking time machine. Okay. You can use my time machine and you can go back and talk to yourself in the early days of building your company. You can't go back and give like who won the Super Bowl in 2023, like none of that kind of stuff. But I'm going to let you go back and just have a quick chat with yourself to impart the most meaningful and helpful wisdom. And I realize this is tailored, whereas the first question is just like for everybody. This is more tailored to you and where you were and the challenges that you now know in hindsight you were going to have to navigate. But I still think there are so many similarities between our professional paths that this will be instructive for others. But I put you in the time machine, you go back. I'll just give you a few minutes. Like, what are you going to spend those precious few minutes talking to your former self about to help her as much as possible?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question. I think I struggled over the last 10 years with like just being confident in myself and feeling that kind of like, I can do that. Can I do that? And I just want to be able to tell myself like, yes, you can do it. It's not going to be easy, but I wanted to be able to tell my previous self, like, I promise it's going to be worth it. And I promise it's going to make a big impact and it's going to make things better. Every single step that I have taken has infinitely allowed me the ability to like do the things that I eventually wanted to get to do. And I'm still excited about continuing to learn, but telling myself just, you've got this, you can do this, and you will.
Is that kind of like, Emily, is it having the confidence to step out on the ledge and to try something new that maybe you were like, I'm worried about whether or not to do it, and your future self giving you that, but like, and knowing that like taking those steps is what opened up a whole new set of opportunities? Is that what we're kind of talking about, having the confidence to try new things where there's like fear of failure, fear of being judged? Like, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, like a big one for me was to quit a full-time day job that our family relied on for our benefits.
Oh, wow.
And the second that I did that, it was very scary. The first month, I was a little bored, to be honest, because I didn't have that full-time day job. And the next year, my business doubled because I had the time and I had the very few distractions at that point. And I look back on it and I'm like, why didn't I do that sooner? You know? And that's like the why didn't I do it sooner was also like it all it works out. It really does.
Well, it's weird because I was almost, you almost kind of preempted my next question, which is like kind of listening to you. It almost sounds like you did do the things. So in that sense, what's the value in the future self telling you? And maybe the value is you would have a little less heartburn and you'd be like, my future self told me. Or are there actually, if we're being fully honest here, are there opportunities that you look back and you're like, in hindsight, I wish I had done that?
Hmm.
They say people, I've said this on previous podcast episodes, they say that the things that we regret when they talk to people that are at life's end and they ask him like ask them what are your biggest regrets, it's not the things that they did, which is kind of where we instinctively, I wish I hadn't
Yeah.
have had that
It's
many
like
or
the
whatever,
things
like
you
wish I
didn't
hadn't done
do.
that because it really failed. It's the things that they didn't do, the things where they were fearful, and that just really resonates with me. I know when I'm
Hmm.
with my kids, particularly my oldest, he's like really kind of like in his own head and so like humbled beyond the point of humility. I'm like, dude, like that fear will keep you in a box. You gotta like, but do you feel like there were opportunities that you would have taken advantage of that, if you knew what you knew now, or do you feel like you just would have had less heartburn doing
I
what you
think
were?
I think it's both. I think I took too long to do the things, even though I know I should have said yes to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, and then as you're going through those growing pains, just that like nervousness and the nervousness leading up to making that final decision,
Yeah.
knowing that like you
Yeah.
can say yes at any point in time. And I
Yeah.
didn't, like
Yeah.
I could have done dot, 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 dot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that
Definitely.
the time wasted
Yeah.
is part of it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I
And
don't know. I think,
confidence also is just such a powerful thing. Like even
yeah,
if you're doing something, like I found myself thinking about that this morning. I'm like, you need to act as if, like you need to, like, and every performance person, coach, whatever. I mean, I know we all know these things, but like it's hard sometimes to practice that. Like, no, I believe that my company is going to be successful. I believe I'm going to find a way. And sometimes, after you get punched to the gut a couple times, it's hard to kind of muster. Like, how do you do that, Emily? Because you're not by nature, like you're the opposite of somebody that's out just like pounding your chest, like I'm amazing, everybody listen to me. Like you're by nature, I feel like just like I am. I feel like just like
yeah,
a humble, like how do you, knowing what you know now, how do you kind of foster your own sort of confidence and courage to kind of step up?
yeah. Every time I feel like I'm worried about that or whatever, my natural instinct is like put my head down and work and just hide from all of those things. And then
Mhm.
I have to remind myself to like still put myself out there and put one foot in front of the other and take those leaps. I'm really a fan of like, you know what, the right couple, the right events are going to come your way if you hold strong and true to who you are
Yeah.
and still be able to offer those like services the way that you would want to and keeping that honor inside.
Yeah.
um and so yeah, I think being like that humble person is also like sometimes really hard because if I was just out there from the top of the rooftops shouting about how awesome I was, like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's hard for me, you
Yeah.
know?
And it's not, well, some people I guess it attracts, but like I feel like a lot of other people, especially people of substance, kind of see past that and they're like, okay, like
Yeah.
no, like let your work speak for itself. Like you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like be confident, but not to the point
Yeah.
of arrogance. Well, I have one more thing really quickly, not so much a question, but more an info gathering. I want people to have a way to contact you, Emily, for two reasons. One, for whatever hodgepodge of reasons, vendors or other planners may just want to connect and make your acquaintance. But also, I firmly believe if there's something you're trying to do, find somebody who's done that thing. Like, like we just talked about, what if you could go back and give advice to yourself in year 1 or year 2? How powerful would that be? Well, somebody right now is back in that stage of building their company. They don't have the team yet. They haven't developed the SOPs and the leadership style and
Hmm.
all that. And you told me kind of going into this that you are actually open to um, taking on mentorship. So, can you just tell people how to reach out to you if they're interested in connecting for any of those reasons?
Yeah, yeah. And I know you'll probably have this posted somewhere too, but our
Yeah.
website is soireeia.com. So that is SOIREEIA.com.
Mhm.
My email address is emily@soireeia.com. And those are probably the best two ways, but we also have an Instagram, we have a TikTok, and those are Soirée Iowa. So SOIREEIOWA at those. So would love to chat with anybody who has questions and interested in some mentorship and looking forward to hearing from them.
Well, on behalf of our audience, Emily, and behalf of our Timeline Genius community, I just want to say thank you again for taking time to be here and more broadly for just being who you are, probably more than you're aware. You're my fuel and the fuel of our team. People like you the same way that you say when a couple gives you that hug and you're like, oh, we couldn't, like, that's the thing. Knowing that we're doing something that's helping wonderful people like you is what drives us. So just thanks for all of that. It's really been a
Thank you
treat.
for having me. It's been a pleasure and an honor. I really, really appreciate being here.